Hey guys, Jason here with a word to the wise. I made that last video and I talked about how in that, I believe it's Daniel 11:38, it was a questionable translation of the God of forces. I've always wondered why they would use forces, and this kind of dives into the whole Old English of the KJV. I know a lot of people say it's the way to go, and I know a lot of people say that there's a lot of deception. Possibly the people that were helping King James in the translation, they could have kept it simple, but it was maybe more of a poetic time where things were flourishing and words were being brought out, new, more poetic, artistic, blah blah blah. The Old English, it really makes the reading of the King James difficult at times. And in this translation, when they were bringing a translation of the Bible, of Hebrew and of Greek to people so that way they could have their independence for it, of understanding Scripture, why would they use more challenging words that the common folk of the time, sorry, I'm trying to keep track of the camera, the more common folk of the time, uneducated, wouldn't this make it harder for them just to understand the simplicity of Scripture or understanding? So we're going to dive into this a little bit, because even today, I'm probably going to go out and buy myself a English Standard Version. I love the BSB, but even then, that can get a little bit, not tongue-tied, but whenever I get to something that I question of how it's written or spoken, and then I see it in other texts more plainly and more to the Greek or the Hebrew translation, very questionable. Why would you make it, again, different than what is being written here, just because you say that you study into it more and it meant this or it meant that, however they want to explain it? I don't know. I'm just studying it myself. So I have a lot of notes, because what I found here in Daniel 11, when I'm looking at the English Standard Version, and then I took all of these scriptures and I went into the Hebrew writings where it's translated on Bible Hub, and here again, this is what it says. Why would they change it? Very questionable. I don't know. Were they trying to protect their scriptures? But here again, I don't know. But we're going to dive into it, and I'm going to make questions as we move along. I'm sorry, this is such a, but I have to say these things just to get it out there ahead of time while we're looking at all this. So this is just a study into Daniel 11. And what I'm talking about here is forces and fortress. Now, words that they've used in this chapter, but why would they change it at certain points versus staying to the Hebrew scripture when they did the King James? And I'm going to show you guys more and more questionable things, and that's why, I've studied. I have two KJVs. I bought one off online, and it's really great because the thing I love about it is every single verse is a new beginning. It doesn't have the verses in the paragraphs and everything. So every single verse is it starts a fresh line of text. I love that, especially when I'm trying to just point out. I don't have to worry about all the other scriptures that are in the way. I have an old one that I got from my dad. It's got like a kind of a leather pleather bound with a zipper. And when my dad was a kid, he did a little bit of highlighting here and there, but he also he found, I guess, like a couple 4-leaf clovers, and he just stuck them in there, you know. And I'm not saying superstition and all that other jazz. I get it, but when he passed, I took one of the flowers from his funeral and I pressed it in the Bible, and I went to my mother's grave and I took flowers to her, and I took a flower from that and I put it in there also. So there's 2 flowers in there, and the zipper was broken. So I had these little keychain things I got from my daughter. She had a bunch of these little bracelet things, and there was a key. So I made a key to the opening and closing of the Bible. It's kind of cool. I love it. But it also has old maps and stuff like that. But I'm getting a little long-winded, so I'm sorry. Let me dive right into this. So when I was looking at Daniel 11, I found where they had fortresses, and fort written over and over and over throughout. But they also had, as in the King James 1138 here, where it speaks of the God of forces. And I said in that last video, I go, well, I'm pretty sure that it's fort as in like a fortress, or a building to keep people in, safe from the outside forces, you know, evil armies or whatever. So why would they change it if they're using the word force, which they know in their scriptures it's written totally different than fortresses? And you'll see how this gets a little more mucky the closer and closer and closer you get to 1138. So I wrote these all down in these notes, and I cross-checked them into the Hebrew to see if it actually said forces or fortresses, or how it was written. And if you look at the Strongs, most of them, just because in the Strong's sometimes the wording that comes with fortress, they changed it, but the same Strong's number is always right there behind it. And it is Strong's 4581. And I'm going to try to pronounce the phonics here of M-A-O-Z, Mauz, or Mauz. And it is a place of means of safety and protection, or peace and security, if you're thinking about those verses in, I think it's 2 Thessalonians or 1 Thessalonians. Like I said, I'm just worried. I'm diving into 11 here, and I've already gotten 8 minutes, so it's taking me a long time. So chapter 11, verse 7, I'm going to have these kind of verses, and I'm just going to point out the wording. So, he shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north. Now I cross-checked that. Fortress. Verse 11:10. His son shall wage war against the assembly. He shall wage, I didn't finish, I must have got up to finish my coffee. He shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and he shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Verse 19. Then he shall turn his face back toward the fortress of his own land. Now, in the King James, I did a little cross-referencing in some of these just to see if the wording was different. And the King James calls this a fort, not a fortress. So here we are getting a little bit closer to that 1138. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Verse 31. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress. So it uses both words in this verse. Verse 31. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress. So forces and fortress. Very clear cut how they deciphered and translated those correctly. But here we are, now getting closer still. And in the King James, and arms shall stand. So let's just stay here for a second on 31, because I wrote it in a different color here, so I forgot to point that out. Here again, this is where the wording gets a little hairy. Why would you change forces? You've already you know the word. It's a Hebrew word. Forces from him shall appear. But what does it say in the King James? And arms shall stand. Arms, as those who are armed, shall stand against them, shall appear. Why would you change the word if you already have the word in your understanding? So now let's go down to 1138. This is the English Standard Version. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. Now that's a lowercase g in the translation, but in the King James and in the King James only, but in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, a God whom his fathers knew not. But in his estate, again, there's a word that's a very educated word to be using, and I put a question mark by it. Why is it in the King James only they capitalize the G of the God of forces, a God whom his fathers knew not? Even after that, in the King James Bible, must be on the other page. Oh, no, it's 38. Where am I? Shall honor the God of forces and a God whom his fathers knew not. So they use the capital G of forces, and after that, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall they honor. And the only one in the King James is when they use the honor in that Old English spelling, H-O-N-O-U-R, which, if you look at all these other verses, they all use fortresses as it is written in Hebrew. Why did the King James change it? So, and now if you go into the next verse, this is the English Standard. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. But here in the King James, thus shall he do in the most strongholds and with a strange god. So they've used fortresses in these other ones. Let's see. Then he shall turn his face towards the fort of his own land. That's the King James. Let's go to which of the verses here? 7. But out of the branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north. Verse 19. We did that one. So verse 10, let's see what it says here. But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and stirred up even to his own fortress. So you know what fortress is. But 31, why change it from what is written? Let's see here. Fortresses. in Daniel 39, where it says, he shall deal with the strongest fortresses. Now this is Hebrew writing backwards. Then he shall act against the fortresses strongest with a god. Now the 4581 moves over to strongest, but when you look at that strongest fortresses, they divide it in the Hebrew Strong's interpretation or the translation. I don't know why, but the MAUZ is fortress, and I'm going to show the Hebrew writing here. As you can see, where fortress is, fortresses, fort, fortress, all has those same Hebrew letters. And in Daniel 31, where it says, and forces by him shall be mustered. Forces. It's a word that is the translation into English anyway of that word. Why would you change it, and why would you put it in the place of where the Hebrew letters are not? So, there again, when you go into a lot of things in the New Testament, which we use to bring the gospel, to bring prophecy, to bring understanding to other people, even others in the faith and those who are not in the faith, why would you make it complicated? Why would you use words outside of what is in the scriptures to fancy it up, to make it a little bit more, in that old English wording? But yet, if you use the word here in one section, one place, one sentence to describe something, or, as it is in scripture, why would you then change it somewhere else where it's more important and more necessary to understand? Why would you capitalize the God of forces? And then when you look in other places, that's what I did. And he shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, capital G, of lowercase g gods. So they were using the capital G and the lowercase g in many places correctly, but then why in 38, the God of forces and a God whom his fathers knew not? So why would you use the capital G even in the other books? Why wouldn't they say, well, here we are writing this down. Why don't we just make sure that we don't capitalize that G, because it is not the true God that they're speaking of. Let me just see here. Even in the translation, the Hebrew translation, but a God of fortresses, it uses that lowercase g, and a God not which did not know his fathers he shall honor. Even there in the translation, it uses the honor as we spell it today, HONOR, but lowercase g's in both instances. Why would you change it in this King James version only? Is it that way? Why would they hold to that? Why would it not be corrected? And I believe if you look at the story of the King James, he brought people in who spoke Greek and who spoke Hebrew. And also in that timepiece land, back in the days, I believe it was prohibited, I'll say that, to speak Hebrew. So they made everybody speak Greek, which is why the New Testament is written in Greek. And I know there's that whole thing with Matthew that a lot of people speak of, that it was originally written in Hebrew, which it doesn't matter either which way, because the rest of those witnesses, we'll call them, the apostles, Peter, Paul, the book of John, the book of Jude, I believe Jude is a separate, it wasn't written by Paul. I'm trying to think. There's John, and then there's John the testator, and there's John the revelator. So you can look at both of those and say, well, what is happening here. You know, they're not what's happening here. I'm sorry, getting too many things all mixed into this right here. So I've had those arguments in the past, and I'm not trying to argue against it. If people want to say that is that, and it gets into the whole, it gets into a whole mess of other things for another time. But I just want to point these things out. I myself, I have the day off. I got a lot of things I'm trying to do. I got to try to fix a power window in my car, my Jeep. Like I said, it's my anniversary, so I'm going to deliver my wife flowers. Aww. Trying to just do a lot of things today, but I'll try to get this all put together as fast as possible so that way I can get this uploaded before I do anything else. And I'm probably going to stop somewhere like a Barnes and Nobles, or I know there's a exciting. Questions, comments, anything you would like to point out and show, please. But go through these scriptures yourself if you'd like. Just in chapter 11, verse 7, 10, 19, 31, 38, and 39 are where I see those words being used. And if you compare, you can go to Bible Hub and you can compare the verse to verse if you'd like. You can just click from verse to verse to verse, and you can see all the different Bibles. The NIV, even the New King James Version is different than the King James Version. They've corrected all those different things in the King James with the capital G and the forces and fortresses. So, but fortress, I just want to point also, looking at fortress and looking what it means. Let me just pull it. I got my phone notes here. Looking at the Strong's as kind of a definition, a place or means of safety, protection. A God of forces, safety, and protection. Now you look over at where that is spoken, I believe it's 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, when they shall say peace and safety, sudden destruction comes upon them. A place of means of protection and safety, a God of forces, a God whom their fathers knew not. And so he shall be honored with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God. Strongholds, not fortress, because that's too close. Why would you have the God of fortresses, peace and safety, and a stronghold? Forces, they changed so much in just that little area, did not have too much crossing over. But now we have translations of Hebrew directly into English. And what is it? That scripture, I heard it yesterday even, knowledge shall increase. I'm not sure where that was in scripture, in Old Testament, New Testament, but there again, just something I want to point out. I'll leave it at that. I've already gone 25 minutes. Like I said, I don't like to go over half an hour because it's like they want me to subscribe or pay for it. So just a word of the wise, guys. Check these things out for yourself. Have a great day. God bless. I think today is finally going to be, it's been 2 weeks of rain in New England, and on the weather map, it's just this spiraling weather system that just will not stop. I mean, you get little bits of sun here and there, but it's been raining for almost 2 weeks straight. I am done with rain. It's great for our yard. My sage is finally coming back. I've got mint coming up. I got to get out of the way because I want the sage this year, not so much the mint. So just a word to the wise, guys. Have a great day. I'm out.